This is a ManeHustle Media podcast.
Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Jackie O and you're listening to Militantly Mixed.
Yo, this is Rashani from the Single Simulcast. And when I'm not making you laugh or making up parody songs, I'm kicking back, listening to Militantly Mixed.
ManeHustle Media podcasts are recorded on the ancestral lands of the Chumash, Tongva, Karankawa, and Hohokam people, and I wish to pay my respects to the people of those nations, both past and present. Konnichi, what's up, cousins? Welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your Sir Auntie, Sharmane Fury, a.k.a. The Blasian Blurred, and this is episode 195, and I have a wonderful guest today. My guest today is Siobhan Diores, a birth worker and a person of Filipino-Irish and recently learned Basque heritage. We had such a good conversation. I was so appreciative of the time I got to spend with Siobhan for this discussion, so I cannot wait for y'all to hear this episode. But I have a few announcements I need to get through in this intro. I want to try to get through it as cleanly as possible, but you know how hard it is for me to keep it tight. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to try to keep it tight, but I'm really looking forward to sharing this episode that you're about to hear with myself and Siobhan here shortly. Where to begin? Well, first thing out the gate, the big announcement. You may have noticed if you are listening to this on Tuesday, January 17th, and you are a subscriber of Militantly Mixed on whichever podcasting platform you listen on, that there was a previous download today to this download of this episode. And that was the special announcement of the co-project, the joint project between Militantly Mixed and the Mixante Confidential, myself, Sharmane Fury, and Teresa Stovall. We are partnering on what we hope to be an annual project of a Be Your Mixed Ass Self anthology. And we are seeking submissions for our very first volume to be published here in 2023. This is I want to say labor of love, even though we haven't started doing a whole lot of labor on it yet, project, because it's something that I have been wanting to do related to the show pretty much the whole time. Teresa herself is a journalist and an author. She has submitted to many anthologies. She has also edited many anthologies. We've been working together so much in this kind of co-Militantly Mixed and Mixante Confidential crossover through her blog and my show that we just thought it didn't make sense for us to do it apart. We needed to do it together. So we started out our announcement earlier today with attention mixed writers. We want to hear your stories. So if you are listening to this show, if you have been listening to the show for a while, if you're new here, but you would like to share your story about being your mixed ass self and whatever that means for you, we are seeking entries for nonfiction, essays, and poetry by March 15th. That is the deadline for entry. To learn more about this, you can go to militantlymixed.com/bymass anthology, and that's BYMAS, which is short, obviously, for Be Your Mixed Ass Self. Or you can just go to militantlymixed.com and click on the anthology tab, and you'll see all of the guidelines for submission there. There is an entry fee, $15 per entry, and you can enter up to 3 pieces to be considered. We are going to be co-editing this anthology, myself and Auntie Teresa. First things first, we need y'all to get writing. You do not have to be a professional writer. We just need you to submit something that was previously unpublished, and that means unpublished in a book, another anthology, the webs, anything. Previously unpublished work submitted to this anthology with the theme or idea of you being your mixed ass self. I am so excited and so looking forward to the entries that we are going to be getting, and I just cannot wait to be able to put this book together with y'all. That is announcement number 1. We talked about it already on the previous little download, but please go and check that out if you haven't heard it yet, and check out the website so you can learn how to submit. All right. Announcement number 2 is I was recently a guest on a couple of different podcasts, but one in particular in which I actually do talk more about mixed identity, and that was I was a guest last week on the Auth Ethnic podcast. So funny enough, it just timed out this way. I recorded this back in November, I think, with Jen Lee and Yonsu Kang, who are the co-hosts of the Auth Ethnic podcast. Jen Lee was also a guest of Militantly Mixed a couple years ago on the Chicanese episode. So we recorded this in November in preparation for the release of their third season. Third season dropped a couple weeks ago, and my episode just timed out to drop last week, after I had also just announced that Jen Lee and I were taking on the co-leadership role of the Mixed Queer Caucus for the Critical Mixed Race Studies, CMRS, organization. It just timed out that all this was happening at the same time. So I'm going to put a link in the show notes so you can check out that episode. We are talking mostly about mixed Asian identity because it is an Asian American podcast, and Jen Lee and I are both mixed Asian Americans. It was a really good discussion, and we do talk about a number of different things that I think I would love to hear what people thought about. So go ahead and check that out. I'll put the link in the show notes so that you can get to that episode if you'd like. I was also recently a guest on a show called Color of Motion. That was more on the nerdy side of things. I talk a lot about my time working with the comic book shop. I talk about, moderating moderating panels at Comic Cons, cosplay, comic books, things like that. That show again is called Color of Motion. It is on YouTube, and the host is Don Terrell. We were both on a panel together at Comic Palooza earlier last year and got to chit chat and decided, there was something there we should get together on Don's podcast. And so, yeah, that aired on Saturday the 7th or something like that. So you can check that out. It is still available on YouTube if you just go to Color of Motion, or if you type in Sharmane Fury, I'm sure it'll pop up if you want to check that out. So it's two guest spots that I did in recent times. That is the Auth Ethnic podcast and Color of Motion. At the start of the year, I had mentioned that I was going to be taking on this co-leadership role with Jen Lee for the Mixed Queer Caucus for CMRS. And we were just waiting for our directives and the information that we needed to start outreaching to gain a listserv so that we can start putting together membership for Mixed Queer Caucus and also future events. We have had our directives meeting, and then Jen and I still have a planning meeting to do. But I'm really excited about what we are going to be able to do in creating this mixed queer space for fellowship, for conversation, for education, and different events. So keep on it. I have already heard back from some of y'all who heard that episode and reached out and said you'd be interested in hearing more about it when the time comes. You're on a little email list, a little, list for me at the moment. As soon as Jen and I finalize the how to join the membership and everything like that and release a little bit more news about it, I will definitely just be pushing out an email to those of you who have already emailed me so far. But if you're hearing this for the first time, you're like, what is that? You can either go back to the first episode of the new year or just wait it out, because in a week or two, I'll probably going to have more information that I'll be able to talk about if you would like to join the Mixed Queer Caucus for the CMRS, Critical Mixed Race Studies Organization, in which I'm going to end up talking a lot about here on Militantly Mixed because I'm the co-lead. So, boom. And I think lastly, I am 70 days away. Well, by the time this episode airs, I'll be 65 days away from my move to Merida, Mexico. And just over the last couple of days, I've suddenly become a little frantic where it's like actually the reality has set in. I have been counting down the days for this move and posting about this on my Queer and Far social media for that platform, that podcast, 100 days out. And for some reason it finally hit like, oh my gosh, there's only a couple months left until I leave. And while I have been focusing and so excited about the actual move, what I haven't been paying attention to was that I'm actually leaving the United States, the country of birth, the place I have been living, I suppose, in comfort my whole life. And that soon that safety net of your, born country is going to be gone. That finally hit me. I don't know why it's taken me so long, but it finally occurred to me I'm going to be living in a place that is not the country that I was born in, which feels a lot different than moving from a state that I wasn't born in. So I'm a little freaking out now. I'm excited. I'm nervous, but I am freaking out a little bit, and I am in crazy packing, throwing away, donating kind of mode. But I'm letting y'all know this because it is still my intention to still release episodes of Militantly Mixed on time. That's why I recorded everything in December and early January so that I can get them all edited. And the only thing that I should have to do every week is record a new intro for that week. And even though last week I did release the Mixed Auntie Confidential episode a day late, that didn't have anything to do with the move. That had something to do with how busy I was on the weekend. So I had scheduled the Monday before release to be my editing day, or my recording day, to be my finish up editing day. And I got the COVID booster, my 5th shot, and it laid me out. So I wasn't able to get my work done on time. And then Tuesday I continued to be pretty washed out. So I didn't actually get the episode up until Wednesday. That is not something that I expect to happen between now and my move, because I have everything mostly planned out. Getting the shot when I got was unexpected, and so that's why it derailed that. But I don't perceive this move derailing my episodes of Militantly Mixed in the way that my move to Houston did, because I'm way more organized about this move, even though I feel completely chaotic about how much stuff I still need to pack and get rid of. So wish me luck, y'all. If you have any tips about moving to another country, definitely share them with me, because I'm that's the thing I'm doing too. I'm reaching out to people, I'm researching and all this other kind of stuff, but sometimes it's that personal story that is really helpful. So if you have lived abroad, moved abroad at some point, and you have any tips that you would like to share to help reduce the stress that comes along with, oh my gosh, in just 65 days, I'm no longer going to be living in my home country anymore, holla at Sharmane. I'd love to hear them. And maybe there's some kind of thing that I can share on my other podcast, Queer and Far, to discuss it. That's it, y'all. Let's get into today's episode. My guest today is Siobhan Diores. We had a really wonderful conversation talking about the importance of representation within birth work, how sometimes the personal is political and how sometimes the political is inserted into your work, and all kinds of things. It was such a wonderful conversation. I'm so glad to be sharing this with y'all. So please check the show notes so that you can follow Siobhan if you would like to learn more about her business as a birth worker, or birth work in general, I guess. But without further ado, please join me in welcoming our latest cousin to the Militantly Mixed family, Siobhan Diores. And today I am joined by Siobhan Diores. Siobhan, why don't you introduce yourself and let's get into it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Sharmane. My name is Siobhan Diores. I use she or they pronouns, and I am joining from Ohlone Land, better known as San Francisco, California, where I am born, raised, rooted. I am a mother of one, a birth worker, a reproductive justice educator, and I'm here because I'm also Filipino and Irish I'll go into that, but my mom is from the southern Philippines. My dad was adopted by an Irish family in San Francisco, so I'm sixth generation San Franciscan. But a few years ago, we found out that he's actually also Basque. So I'm working that into my identity and getting in touch with that. So Filipino and Irish, I mostly say, but there's a little more in that European side that I'm still unpacking.
So your father, is he also ethnically Irish beyond being adopted into an Irish
Yeah,
family?
yeah.
Okay.
So his mom was Irish and she got pregnant in the 60s before you could be a single mom and found an Irish family through the church. And then so we always, I guess that's how the adoptions were done a lot those days, is like through the Catholic Church. So he grew up with this Irish family. That was our whole, I mean, my name's Siobhan. So I'm like later finding out from the ancestry, oh, I'm only like less than a quarter ethnically Irish. I'm a fraud over here with my name. But yes, his mother was Irish.
Okay. And then as you've learned about the Basques, well, before you get too worried about incorporating, even if you want to, is this Ancestry.com or 23andMe?
It was Ancestry, but the Ancestry was like a whole mix, like Irish, Scottish, Italian, all these things. But the Basque part actually came from reuniting with his biological father.
Okay.
Yeah. So it turns out they're from Idaho, not as cool as San Francisco as we've always identified, but that's where his biological parents were. And I guess there's a big Basque American community in Boise, Idaho, apparently.
Of all places that people
News to me, but his father was, they're really proud of that Basque identity.
So what I would say though, okay, so now you know that and you can start to explore it in terms of the Irish, like the way like the Anglo is just kind of splashed around all of Ancestry. Ancestry doesn't hold a whole lot of they do for European, Europe and Anglo. So if they have it, there's enough evidence for it. But they don't hold a whole lot of markers for outside of Europe. So like you might get, the Iberian Peninsula one day and then it'll be gone. And then, or it'll come back, like they reset their.
Totally.
Their
I had it. I think we first joined it like maybe 2016. And so I get the updates. That's like every year or two, they're like, it's been updated, and it shifts. It stayed pretty consistent. I mean, it's definitely still like 50% Asian, 50% white, but definitely the regions kind of shift around.
Yeah, that's happened to me a lot. I've had Scandinavian taken away, given, taken away, given. And in my case, I just kind of, at that point, go with what cultures my family held. Like, my British side was a mix of Welsh and English and Spanish from way, way back, but not enough for us to know it, just enough for us to have black hair, I guess. And on my mother's white side, they've been here in the States since 1711, and so they were Appalachian people, which everybody assumed as Scots-Irish, but in our case was like, or German-Irish is what they thought. In our case, they're actually Scottish and a little bit Irish, in terms of DNA and stuff like that. So but with the black side, I don't pay attention to what they update.
Yeah.
Because they just don't have enough stuff.
Yeah, my husband is half, his dad is Jamaican, so it's shifted around a lot of like Afro-Jamaican to, now they're kind of getting more, I guess, data there, but it's still like the Africa part has been like shifting all over the place, all these little percentages.
That we descend from the Bantu people, and the Bantu people went from Kenya to South Africa to up the western coast, and so we're probably a mix of all these places, but the countries didn't even exist when those migrations were happening. So to say that I'm Nigerian, if probably not, that kind of thing. So I did African Ancestry, which is a different company, and they have more markers for the actual continent. So I was able to get down to the 3 tribes in the what's currently known as Gabon, that my father's paternal side has. We still haven't done the father's maternal side part, or my grandfather's maternal side. We still haven't done that part yet, but
good to know that they're coming out with different things, although I know it's still a question of what people are doing with all that data, but it
becomes a thing. I get why people are cautious of spitting in the
I'm
tube.
like, if they want me, they already got me in every facet, my face,
like all that stuff. The reason why I did it is because I wanted to see if I have siblings that my dad didn't talk about.
Mm,
I'm
interesting.
fully waiting to find trophies in the world. That's what I refer to them, as the secret
Wow.
siblings. So I believe that there are more out there than just me and my brother and my half siblings, but I'm sure that that's why I did it. Like, legit, that's the reason why I did it. I wanted to see the drama.
Well, interesting, because my dad did it the first time, not with that intention, even though he knew he was adopted. He just wanted to know the ethnic makeup, and that is how he got reunited with his biological family, was that someone messaged him on Facebook and was like, I was on my Ancestry and it says we're cousins and I never heard of you. World shattering.
Yeah.
Your uncle had an affair.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm there for. I don't like watching like reality TV, but when I find out that there's a DNA scandal that I live for it. I don't know why. I just do.
I agree.
That's fun. But let's get into talking about you a little bit more. So I'm a person who loves the hybrid terms that we come up with for our mixes, and you wrote in your form Pinary-Rish.
Yeah, Pinary-Rish.
Pinary-Rish, is that
So
how you
like
say
you
it?
said, you were saying like more about the identity and the culture. That's what I go by, even though I found out this bad stuff. Like, I was raised by this Irish American, very
Right.
like true to their identity family. So I still, and Pinary-Rish, just short and sweet. I love it.
Yeah, I love it. I love the hybrid terms that we come up with, because it's a way for us to really, like, we're hybrids. Why wouldn't we want to mix it together? I love it. So yeah, like, that is I always make jokes of like, things are my kinks. This has become a kink for me. If I hear that someone has a hybrid term, I'm like, I need to know your hybrid term, because I enjoy it. So.
You said it's your kink.
Yeah, so like that, like yeah, I like to call things that aren't even remotely related to kinks my kinks, and one of those is to create a hybrid term, because it gives us like a sense of ownership of what it is that we are. If I can maneuver black spaces, even presenting the way I do, pretty comfortably, I'm getting more access to maneuver Asian American spaces in a way that I didn't used to be able to. I have yet to be able to maneuver Japanese spaces as an accepted Japanese person or Japanese mixed person. So creating my little hybrid term for me, Blackanese, was my way as a young person to feel like, well, this is my thing. This is what I. So I do. I love that.
I love that. My nephew, he's 13 and he calls himself Blackapino.
I love Black Pinot. Yeah, I do. We have some Black Pinots that have been on the show before. That's a good one too. I think what I love about it in particular is the ownership aspect. Is that it gives us that room to stake our claim, because as much as love to tell us to, go into the spaces of the people that we come from and be a part of that story, because I am a part of Blackness, I am a part of Japaneseness, I am a part of I say Britishness versus like whiteness, because my white is British, like where my Nana lived with me and she was the only white person in my family, but I know that I can't 100% understand how to maneuver in those spaces and stuff. So in creating those terms, I think we create like a freedom for us to maneuver.
I agree.
In those spaces. So why don't we talk a little bit, like you and I talked about how you were kind of born and raised in the Bay Area, which for Asian Americans, it's far more common for us to be used to mixed Asians than I think any other parts of the country necessarily. So you said what you were experiencing was like you were far more used to mixed folks than, say, other mixed people that you were encountering later on, which is very similar to me. I grew up with a lot of mixed people too. Did you feel like you had any identity things in terms of understanding who you were when you were kind of growing up?
Yeah, so growing up in San Francisco, my mom's Filipino, my dad's Irish, this white dude. And there were, in the earlier days as kids, we were the schools we went to were mostly Black and Latino. So we were the only Asian kids and the only white kids. So it was just outsider. Either way you go, no one really cared which way. It was like, well, they look different. We don't really know what they are, but we never really were excluded in that sense. And I think that, just that identity, in my earlier days before I transferred schools, which was like mid-elementary, then went to a super Chinese, like predominantly Chinese school. That's the first time where I really felt that, because this would probably surprise people, but it's the first time we really experienced like prejudice was from the Chinese kids calling us slurs for being like not Asian enough. Like there was this whole Asian pride movement, I feel like in the 90s, where it was, which is like cool, but I think it's always going to be dominant group versus whatever the minority is. So that was the first time I started to think about that stuff. Was being like, oh yeah, you're right, I am white, and Filipinos are also Southeast Asian, which are looked down on by a lot of East Asians. So that kind of came in where it was more like, oh, you're Filipino versus like you're something different. But then I grew up really close with my older sister is full Filipino, and she had my niece really young, and my niece is Filipino and Black. So she was always with us like a little sister. And actually having her around was what really exposed us to the first like real racism. Was like, oh, they're Filipino and they have, the like their identifier Blackapino girl. So most of our identity stuff came from not fitting in with Asians, even though we were in this like Asian world. For my identity, as far as that went, thankfully, because there were so many of us, I'm one of four, and then plus my niece, we kind of had our own little gang going on that it didn't really matter, and people still thought we were kind of cool because we were like this like close-knit little family that was kind of like, can you swear on the show?
Yeah.
I was like, don't fuck with us. Like, we're not going to fuck with them because they roll deep, this little mixed family. But it's still, like you were saying, was like being around white kids, there's something different. They'll point out that you're Asian. Being with Asian kids, they'll point out that you're white and crack jokes like, oh, she's our white girl and she's our Asian girl. But because it was so normal, I don't think, thankfully, I really felt much like insecurity around that. There were so many other things to be insecure about, I feel like, in my life. Like, this is how I see now being mixed was like always being in the in between like sizes, in between all sexualities, like that stuff I think gave me more of that versus the racial differences.
No, yeah, I can see that too. I think I've said on the show a bunch of times about how Asian American identity is so weird because we don't have like Asian solidarity in Asia. Like, you're East Asian, you're Southeast Asian, you're South Asian. And then amongst the East Asians, none of us get along. And amongst the Southeast Asians, it's a mix of who gets along based off of who occupied them or who colonized them. Like, so there's all these different divides across all of Asia. And then you come here where the population just views you all as one thing. And it's usually whatever is the most common Asian group around where they grew up, that's what all Asians are. So if they're only around Chinese, then all Asians are Chinese no matter what. And the amount of times I've had to answer, hey, Sharmane, you're Chinese, right? No. And I've talked about that, no.
So many times.
And then the lack of education, I think, that some of us who grow up Asian American have about the atrocities that were committed in Asia by other Asians, like the Japanese. I rolled through Asian American spaces, like, Asian American groups in high school and stuff like that, thinking I'm going to get some Asian solidarity. And when I'm excluded, I'm thinking I'm excluded because I'm mixed. And I didn't understand that in some cases I was being excluded because I was Japanese. And the people that were mostly in these groups were Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese, and Filipino, groups that Japan had committed atrocities in. And I didn't know that. So I didn't know that that's how I was, that's what I was doing by entering in those spaces. So I just grew up with this little bit of a, Asians don't like me. I'm in my mind, I'm too Black to be Asian. I guess was what I was thinking was happening. And that might have been the case in some places, but I think I was too Japanese to be Asian in a lot of cases. And it wasn't until I got that education that I started realizing that I had to maneuver those spaces a little bit different and acknowledge that, like, yeah, I come from the colonizer of Asia, or a colonizer of Asia, I guess. And that really changed, like, the way I started to maneuver Asian spaces. The other part is in my Japanese family. I wasn't Japanese because I wasn't born in Japan, but I didn't know that that's what they meant. I thought they were saying I was just not Japanese because, again, I thought because I was mixed. So it's weird when, like, the first time we experience some kind of "you're not Asian enough" comes from Asians, because you're just like, what? Like, why? It's so frustrating. But, you know, I feel like I'm getting better. I'm getting more access and things like that. So I'm starting to understand, like, how to maneuver in those spaces. But with you, like, because you also have a white parent, do people see you as mixed Asian, or how are you viewed out in the world? What do people
It's so inconsistent. I think the most common is people think I'm Latina. People usually think I'm Mexican. Being in California, that's the most assumed. I lived in South Florida for a little too, where they would just automatically speak Spanish because everyone there speaks Spanish. White, black, doesn't matter. And when I would say, no, I don't, they'd be like, why not? Your mom didn't teach you? And then I would say, nope, I'm actually Filipino. And they go, don't they speak Spanish?
They got Spanish last names, don't they?
Yeah, they're like, I'm confused. I thought you guys speak Spanish. So it's pretty inconsistent. I would say now, I think as an adult, I get recognized more as being Filipino or mix of some sort. As a kid, maybe because I was around so many Asians, it was more obvious that I was white. I really look like both of my parents. It's funny because I have like the face of my mom, but people will place me more as looking at my dad because I have like a tall, broader body. He kind of has this like round nose and smaller eyes, despite him not being Asian. And so people would usually be like, oh, you look like your dad and you're white. And then Filipinos a lot of times would be curious and ask because, and we'll probably get into this, of just like the kind of fetishization of being mixed with white that's like aspirational. So I think Filipinos could recognize it in a way that was kind of like, ooh, like you're mestiza, like, oh, you're mixed, like you're so beautiful, like it's immediately this kind of like, you're not like us, but you are one of us, and you're like one of us. It's kind of weird. Like,
it's almost like you give them hope for, and I hate that I'm saying these words, but like you give them hope for a betterment of the race because now white people are included. That is actually a huge topic that I think like the white Asian mixes in particular experience this. So I come from a military family. So I have American Air Force soldiers, I guess, that left the country to serve in other countries and then found their wives and brought them here. So in my case, I have this very strong stigma of white men in military who go and find yellow brides. Like, it's in my family, and multiple members of my family have done this. And so when I hear the white Asian mix and the man is white, I instantly go like military, because I think about, you know, all the imperialism and stuff, and I still got shit to work out, like, with my family about that.
Totally. But I'll be roasting Wasians for that reason. I am a big fan of Wasian humor online that like comes for the white Asian stereotypes and experiences. And I will preface that was not my parents' situation.
Right.
They have they actually like fell in love or the same age when my mom came to the US. But I noticed that, and it's so, because makes my skin crawl sometimes.
What I didn't know until doing this show, like legit did not know, because I had such a strong focus on the white soldiers going to yellow countries type of thing, and what happened to my grandma when she got here, like what the military made her do. So that was all my focus. I was completely closed-minded to any other story. But then I started hearing on this show the mixed white Asians talking about how their Asian parents were fetishizing the white, like that it didn't matter what white person they found, as long as they found a white person that they could have babies with. And that shit just like blew open a whole different, like I haven't processed fully, even in 4 years, I have not processed fully the idea of the reverse of what I find as a problematic, fetishization.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of like a symbiotic thing that was like psychological by those things happening, like, soldiers going out there. Then in a fucked up way, I think, like, just speaking for myself, I guess, that a lot of these women in the Philippines saw, like, from the outside looking in, oh, well, that's not so bad. They got rescued from here, not having the political analysis that that's what was causing the need to be rescued and taken out of the situation. But that's what I've seen in my family was like, well, things are so messed up here. So we want a white guy to take us out. We would love to be taken to the US. And then that's why coming here, I think that I totally see that it then, like, it's like the whole history of it got forgotten and all that was taken away was like white aspirational. Find a white husband. Great.
Yeah.
Goals.
Yeah. No, I think it's an important conversation for us to have in the mixed Asian community, especially where white is a part of it. The flip of, like in my case, because Black is my dominant, like, ethnic identity or cultural identity, I don't view myself in Wasian terms the way that I view myself in Blasian terms. Like I move more in Black spaces than I do in white spaces. And of course, never being able to be seen as a white person. Whereas a lot of Wasians that I speak to on this show get misidentified as white, even if they or told that they're white passing, which is not the correct use of the term, but they're told they're white passing, they believe they're white passing, and I'm looking at someone that looks clearly like a mixed Asian, like when they come
I think we recognize each other, and then a lot of times people, I say white perceived because I know the white passing is like so misused.
It's so misused,
I'll say white perceived, and because I like that I'm like, your perception is not really my responsibility. It's not anything I'm trying to do, but definitely I would say it's a mixed bag, but white perceived. But I would say non-white people are easily, like, can tell, like, oh yeah, you're something.
And even if they don't know what it is, because that's also the difference between me answering the question, what are you, or a version of that question, which is what I say on the show a lot, is that Black people say, what are you mixed with? Identifying, I can tell that you're Black, but what's the other part? With Asians, I don't really get that. I will get a closer thing to what white people do, which is the where are you from or what are you? They'll get like, you're not, I can't tell where you are. Like
they don't even want to complete the question. They're just going to give like a until you offer the information.
You offer it. Right, exactly. Whereas like Latino people will just be straight up like, Dominican? No. Puerto Rican? No. Cuban? No. And you're just sitting there like, okay, I'll just tell you I'm Black and Japanese, and they'll be like, you're incorrect. You are obviously Dominican. Why don't you speak
No,
Spanish?
You're not.
So like in brown people,
that's totally how being in South Florida was. They're like, no, you're Spanish.
You're obviously.
I'm like, I'm definitely not Spanish.
But they want to own you, which I appreciate. Sometimes it's super aggressive in a way of just like, you don't appreciate the people that you come from, and so I'm going to force you to appreciate the Dominican people. And so I appreciate that they want me, but at the same time it's just like, no, this is what I am. Whereas white people are the only people that'll directly say like, no, I need to understand how to other you or exoticize you with the way that they ask the questions. And then Asians have the really dismissal, like you said, just something, please tell me so I don't have to say it out loud type of thing.
Yeah, I've always found that it's other people seeking, they need the box to make them feel comfortable in how to proceed. Whereas, like I said, and I totally get this is not the popular experience. It just really wasn't a big deal to me growing up because of what I saw. And I am unpacking a lot more later because I also am like, okay, well, I also was made to believe it wasn't a big deal. And a lot of things like color blindness was kind of the way that my family went about it. So I'm unpacking it now, but growing up, I would just be like, why do you care? Like, you know, like I was very rebellious. So just like, I'm not, or like fucking with people. Like, I'm not even going to answer just to like be annoying. Like,
that's probably great.
I'm a human.
You did that though. Like that, it probably gave you a little bit of an armor against like when you were being actively othered, to be able to do
totally. It was a power move.
Even if you have shit to unpack about that now, I still feel like that was probably the healthiest way you could have maneuvered at that age for that. How do you move now? Like, do you feel a separation from how you identified before, or does it feel pretty seamless into your adulthood?
Yeah, now, I mean, in general, I reject the term white because I just am rejecting whiteness as a whole. Which my dad, I think, was always like, we're Irish, we're not white, but his reasoning for it was very different, whereas mine is very like political, like let's just dismantle the concept of whiteness in general. But I still, you know, Pinary-Rish is how I identify. I think naturally my life, I've been surrounded by more Filipino friends and mixed friends and mixed, just most of my friends are mixed. So I think the way that I move around is more Asian American. Also, I would give some of that to just that I was raised by an Asian mother. And I think that being raised by her primarily made me identify more with the culture, the food. I'm a birth worker, so a lot of the ways that I care for my clients are through like Asian, I guess, perspectives and like healing philosophies, including Chinese, because my Filipino side does have Chinese ancestry. But yeah, I have a very mixed identity, and I'm very comfortable now just being like, yeah, I'm all the things. I don't say half this, half that anymore. I think that's a really important conversation that got more popular the last few years that I'm really grateful for, was that validation. And I'm sure your show like has like had a influence in there that's like, we are all these things. Like, I am fully this, I am fully that. And then I am a really spiritual person that's been on this path of connecting with my ancestors, that, you know, feeling that from them and feeling that like strong cultural like connection so deeply has been really validating too, that I don't have to pick. And in the last year, this like kind of collided with everything. I met 3 other Filipino and Irish specifically people, and like we walked into each other's lives, and I was like, whoa. And seeing the similarities of the cultures, even seeing the similarities of just like so many things. I have this other theory that I won't get into, but I have a theory around Southeast Asia and like Celtic cultures. There's some kind of connection because the folklore and there's so many weird similarities, but I won't go down that road.
Well, I like to I there's something there. I do agree, because whether or not this is an accurate way of describing them, you think of the Celts as like the indigenous people of those islands. Because once the Anglos came in, there was domination. There were like all the same things that happened to brown places that white people getting on boats did happened to Irish people, Scottish people, Welsh people. Like the same things were happening. So I agree. There's some shared ancestral type of behaviors and things I think are going over there. It doesn't happen to me often, but when you can meet somebody that has your same mix, there is something kind of extra special than to just meet mixed people in general. Although meeting mixed people in general is great and it's helpful because you're like, I don't have to explain what I'm talking about. You already get what I'm talking But there's something, kind of nice and
Yeah,
special
I didn't
about
think it would be as exciting as it
it
was.
is though.
Because, like I
Yeah.
said, I think I kind of suppressed a lot of that for myself. That was like, I don't need that. I'm me. I have my siblings that get it. But yeah, it has been special.
Yeah. And I agree with the validating part of it, because like my brother and I grew up in the same house, and although we don't identify publicly the same, we aligned with different parts of our heritage and stuff like that. There's things that he and I would share that it's fine. It's like we're family. It's whatever. But if I meet somebody out in the wild and they're like, "Oh, this happens to me when I combine this Japanese food with this black food or something like that," and we have that shared. That there's like it's way more validating to have that, to find that in the wild than to find it in your own family, I think.
Yeah, totally.
For some reason. Can I ask about your, as a birth worker and as a person of color and as coming from a culture that is sort of known more for like caretaking and things like that, how does that play out? If it's okay to ask, how does that play out in the work that you do with mothers from different backgrounds?
That's such a great question, because actually the first thing that comes to mind was that in the beginning of being a birth worker, I think my mom and my aunties were very confused, because I was seeing it as this like, I wasn't seeing it as being another Filipino caregiver. And I think their reactions in the beginning were like, what do you not like about this? Why is this like not interesting to you? Because I thought like, this is so cool. I'm learning our birth traditions. And then realizing that was like, oh my gosh, we came all the way here for you to be like an in-home worker. And there's like a shame to that. And my mom and I actually got into a little, like was constantly like, well, are you going to go to nursing school? Like, be a nurse, be a nurse, be a nurse. And I finally said to her, like, do you realize how much I love my job and like the impact that I'm making that I share with you? I'm really proud of this job. And I think that it didn't really click to me that I was a Filipino woman that chose to be like an in-home caregiver, which gave me this, one, it clicked of why I was led to it, because I think that that's part of my practice, is trying to bring a lot of pride back to a lot of dignity, I would say, actually bringing the dignity back to being a caregiver. Irish people too have like a lot of stereotype about being nurses and stuff. So it's really,
true. Yeah,
I didn't really think about that before, but to your question of like, was it what it's like
like
to?
when you're caring for people from different backgrounds. I've
Oh,
had a few
yeah.
folks that have been on the show where they've talked about like if they're caring for a black person and they are a mixed black person, the relief that the mother experiences knowing, oh, someone who kind of is like me is in care.
Yeah.
Are you
Yes.
experiencing a version of that, like depending on the backgrounds that people are coming from, you being specifically a non obvious white presenting person, would that be helpful in your practice?
Yeah. So, okay. So yes, now I really appreciate that question, because in the beginning, when I began my practice, especially somewhere like the Bay Area where there's a lot of wealthy people, and I'm picking between, the full paying client and then the clients that are my peers who are not the people who can afford usually the full price. That was really hard for me in the beginning to not be so selective about. Now I'm very selective actually of who I work for. I only work for either personal friends, Asian clients, or non-white, and not explicitly, but I don't, it's not like on my website, like I'm not going to work with whatever, because I do have clients of all backgrounds, but I'm very bold about my values, make sure they look at my Instagram and see like what I'm about, because there were times in the beginning where I worked with families that did just treat me like the help.
Right.
And it did feel very just degrading about like giving me all these insights of like, wow, like you don't really care to know much about the person that you're trusting with your baby every
Isn't
night
that
for the first few
wild?
months. Like, yeah, very fascinating. I'm like, whoa, like that has never occurred to me. Like
Right.
working with different families. And I actually don't work with, unless they're my personal friends, I actually don't work with Black birthing people anymore either, because I will refer them to a Black birth worker that will be closer in. So in the beginning I did, and also it's, you know, what's available in the Bay Area. I still like, if there's a shortage of people finding that person, I will. But over time I realized like, wow, people really deserve one, somebody that they can connect with in these vulnerable moments, but also somebody that at least is trying to get your culture. So it's been, most of my clients now are Asian American women. I also say I haven't worked with any trans birthing people because same kind of thing. I'm gonna refer them to a trans birth worker or somebody who specializes and gets those
Right.
experiences more. But yeah, being in that position with my identity, I think people appreciate having, because, you know, a lot of people, their biggest concern going in, like I have a lot of people come to me saying like, I don't want a white person with me. They don't want to be in their labor and be triggered by some
Exactly.
accidental cultural like microaggression, even just like the image sometimes of
Yeah.
seeing people.
Yeah.
So I do find that a lot of people really, really seek out birth workers that match their identities, because especially during the pandemic, a lot of people who normally would have their families or their moms, like if they're not local, have their mom or grandma fly in and stay with them for those first couple months. And that was kind of taken away. The next best thing is somebody that's like as close as possible to the culture that they identify with. So I'm really grateful over time that I've been able to discern more who I work with, because there's such a divide in the birthwork community of people who think it's elite and hired help, because there have been those families who hired me because they're like, well, the nurses don't really tend to us much, so they want just like a servant on hand there.
Right. Yeah.
And that is a privilege to be able to like say no. Not really a privilege, because it's not like I made, like it's not like I really had the money to not, but I chose that, like that integrity for me was more important than just getting people's money.
And over time, you'll be a better person for the families you do work with, because you're not always having to process those
Yeah,
triggers and those,
totally. Because
traumas and
I
stuff.
have had my own birth experience, my own abortion experience, where there was some discrimination toward me, and some, I won't say out. It wasn't like overtly, but there were just things that were really off about it that I'm susceptible to having my own. And that is what I experienced watching these births and watching how these people care for their children, and like my own personal feelings. It's just like, oh my God, this is so like, you know, white culture is like what dominant white, like waspy culture. It's really not loving toward there's a loss of
Yeah.
empathy.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
um and that's embedded in just white supremacist culture, I think, is like you really see it around birth, the choices that people make, the way they treat their help, the way that they make their plans for their babies those first couple months, like don't allow them in the room, don't allow, like, yeah, it does. I'm seeing now as I move forward into the next year of how I still want to find a way that meets that honors my own needs, that I still work with white families around this stuff, because I think it is important, and I don't want to leave. I do think I have a personal responsibility as a like white perceived person, um not responsibility, opportunity. I think I have an opportunity where I'm heard a lot of times by white families and can bridge that. So I'm finding ways that I can still make an impact, but it's not going to be the same as it was before in their homes every night, because it did feel degrading after a while.
No, yeah, I can imagine. No, I appreciate you answering that, because um, me choosing not to be a mother of human children, I guess. I one of the biggest reliefs of my recent medical life is starting to have Black and Asian doctors and nurses, and being able to choose that because of the location that I'm in. I have that opportunity, and the relief I feel in going to actually the amount of times I go to the doctor now actually increases, because I feel more comfortable with the person that is taking care of me in those moments, and that they have an awareness of when I say I'm both Black and Asian, I need to be checking for the things that affect Black people and stuff, and finally having the doctors who stop and listen to those things, like the impact I've experienced. And I'm not doing anything nearly as dramatic as entrusting the life of this thing I've been growing. Like I can't imagine being very dismissive about something that came out of my body. It just, and of course I'm not choosing to be a mother. So I know I don't have the right context to be able to talk about it beyond just like understanding that ethnically I would appreciate someone who matches in some way, shape, or form, because I think there's a level of comfort and empathy that goes there.
Yeah, doulas literally exist to, I think, be that bridge for that. Like, there's just such a gap there, and like, one, culturally competent care is lacking. Two, like, continuity of the care is lacking, and like having that relationship. So it really is, I feel really honored to be invited in those spaces, and I see my whiteness come into play as an advantage. And I don't know, a client has told me this, but sometimes I wonder, I'm like, oh, maybe they like, I wouldn't be offended or surprised if that was a plus side to some of my like not mixed with white at all clients wanting me as a mixed person, because doctors, and it also comes with like the way I present myself, the way I speak, that doctors will listen to me when they feel unheard, and that I'm there to observe and take notes, and knowing that there is this kind of like sort of white presence that has an eye on them, that they, whether subconsciously or not, respect more, or puts them a little, like perks them up a little more, like, okay, there's somebody here that's kind of keeping an eye. So I hadn't really thought of that before, but I think it does come into play in this work, the way that I'm received when I'm at the hospital with my clients.
Yeah, the way in which we can, whether or not it's problematic is a different story, but to utilize the palatableness that comes along with being a mixed person in some spaces, all the commas, to be able to use that as a way to improve the situation for your clients, I think is a really great way to work that in the versus just like accepting the palatability status, like, okay, it's just the way it is, I'm just gonna, but this is like an active way to be able to utilize it. I think that's brilliant if you can thread that line with people. And I would completely understand why a person of color would choose a mixed with white person, because you're like a translator.
Yeah.
You could be like a translator depending on your background too. No, I think that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that with me, because I was curious. Like, I wrote it down when you first said that. I was like, oh, let's get into that question really. We are coming a little bit close to the end of this, though. So one of the things that I do like to ask all of the people that I speak with, because sometimes we do talk about trauma and difficulties related to our mixedness, what is something that you love most about being mixed?
I think being mixed, well, the first thing that comes to mind is I love the food of having a mixed family, because our parties always have all types of food, and it's never bland around here. That's probably my favorite part. But I also love the perspective that I'm able to bring to spaces, and over time I have really come to see that as a personal superpower, this ability to shift and kind of glide between and observe and offer insight that people may either not have considered, being in the spaces where maybe they don't know a person of colors in the room, and being that person that does speak out. I really do love being able to use my privilege or identity in a way that can offer expansion of a conversation or expansion of thinking. And I think that's a role that I used to be forced into, that now I'm really embracing as a strength, that I can kind of push the boundaries a little bit, and offer that in a way. And like you said, like not wielding it like in an entitled way, but it is kind of fun to push the limits a little bit. And I feel a little bit of safety in my ambiguity, where people relate to me enough to form a little bit more understanding and empathy and kindness in some ways, which is fucked up. But I think that is my favorite thing that I love about my positioning, is that I get people to consider other things that they may not, in a way that's kind of safe for them, because I still do it with a lot of love and still do it from a place that's like, I'm different, but I'm also reaching out and connecting with you because we're the same, but we're different. And I'm going to let you know why that's a good thing. So,
right. Oh, I appreciate that. Since you did bring up food, though, do you have a hybrid food that mixes your...
I don't have a particular one, but I remember when I was in middle school, one of my AIM screen names was corned beef lumpia.
That's excellent.
I never actually made it though, so now I'm gonna have to. Our holiday meals are always automatically hybrid because we bring in, my mom will just be like, this needs rice. So any kind of like gravy Irish stew. Actually, that would be a hybrid meal in my house. Would be like the Irish stew, but eating it with rice.
With rice, which would be perfect because, well, I mean, I'm thinking about it as like Japanese kare, like Japanese rice. It would be like that, but with rice. No, that's brilliant. So that's another kink of mine is learning new another kink is learning new hybrid foods that people can try. For me, I don't necessarily have, like, what I like is, like, I like fried chicken. It's fine. But I love Japanese fried chicken because it's a combination of the two things that, from my culture. So it's not necessarily like the whole meal itself is a hybrid, but just the act, I guess, of
with some gravy. Have you ever had Jollibee?
Mm-hmm.
Jollibee fried chicken with the gravy. That's a little hybridy of them.
It's a little bit hybridy, yeah. No, that works. Yeah, so that's cute. Well, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your story with me. I think adding the perspective, which I've only been able to share on the show a few times with birth workers, and the impact, I think is very important to share as well. So thank you for talking about that with me a little bit as well. Do you want to tell people how to find you? Do you want to connect on the social media?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so my Instagram is at Siobhan.Diores. You'll probably need to look at the notes for how to spell all of that. But I am a birth worker doing a lot of online spaces as well, helping people and be embodied as parents. I'm actually shifting away from attending births and postpartums due to my marriage separation, just changing my son's needs and being more present with him and not on call. So I'm going to be doing a lot of online spaces for single parents, for co-parenting, for energy work. I play in the space, the intersection of politics, spirituality, and science. So that's my approach. And if that resonates with you, then reach out.
Okay, thank you for sharing it.
Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship, or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed ass self. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.